Her ex spotted her in a packed nightclub and started pushing through people to reach her. She needed cover fast. She grabbed the nearest man in a black suit and hugged him like they were together. He didn't move her away. Security blocked the ex. She could finally breathe. She thought she had escaped. She hadn't. The man she hugged was a Mafia boss. By tomorrow her apartment would be wrecked. Her closest friend would not be who she thought, and that one hug would pull her into a fight she could not step out of. Now the real danger was standing beside her. The night pulsed with loud music and flashing lights that blurred together like chaos. Maya tried to relax, forcing herself to smile while holding a glass she didn't want. Her friend Nina kept saying she needed to have fun again, to forget the months of hiding from Ethan. But Maya's chest felt tight. Every laugh in the crowd sounded like a warning. The club was supposed to help her feel normal again, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. She had learned to recognize that kind of silence before everything went wrong. She scanned the dance floor, hoping it was just her nerves acting up. The flashing lights revealed familiar faces of strangers, people lost in their own nights. Nina danced near the bar, carefree and loud. Maya wished she could borrow even an ounce of that peace. She sipped her drink, trying to drown the unease rising inside her. Then, through the blur of neon, she saw a figure she knew too well. Ethan. He looked exactly how she remembered. Sharp suit, fake smile, and eyes that promised chaos. He had found her again. The air in her lungs froze. Ethan was pushing through people, his expression tightening as he scanned the crowd. Her heart pounded so loudly it felt like part of the music. She set her drink down, her hands trembling. All she could think about was escape. The exit was across the dance floor, blocked by too many bodies. The bathroom would trap her. She needed another way, anyway. Her eyes darted to the VIP section, velvet ropes, quiet corners, men in suits who looked untouchable. She didn't think, she just moved. Maya slipped past the velvet rope, ignoring the confused guard's look. Her eyes locked on a man sitting alone in the far corner. He seemed carved out of calm, broad shoulders, sharp eyes, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Every part of him looked in control, as if the chaos of the room didn't touch him. Desperation drove her closer. Before she could think, she wrapped her arms around him, pretending it was affection. Her body trembled against his as she whispered for help, only he could hear through her shaking breath. For a few long seconds the man didn't react. He simply looked at her, studying her with an unreadable expression. Then his arm moved, steady and firm, wrapping around her waist, like it was the most natural thing in the world. She felt his calm heartbeat against hers, an anchor in the noise. Ethan's angry voice echoed behind her, but when he reached the rope, the guards stepped in. They blocked his path with cold efficiency. Maya dared to glance back and saw Ethan's fury turn into disbelief. She was safe, at least for now. The stranger's grip didn't loosen. His hand rested on her lower back, protective but commanding. Maya's mind spun. She didn't know him, yet he acted like she belonged there. The crowd around them went on dancing, unaware that her entire world had just shifted. Ethan shouted something at the guards, but they ignored him completely. After a tense moment, he turned and disappeared into the crowd. The stranger finally leaned back slightly, his gaze never leaving her face. It wasn't comfort she saw in his eyes. It was ownership. She tried to pull away, but his hand stayed firm on her arm. He spoke quietly, his tone calm yet final, and though she couldn't make out the exact words, the meaning was clear. She wasn't in danger anymore. Not from Ethan, at least. Maya nodded, not sure whether to thank him or run. The man gestured to one of the guards, who nodded back and disappeared through the crowd. The room felt smaller, the lights harsher. She realized everyone around him moved differently, like the whole club operated under his silent control. The stranger finally let her go, motioning for a drink to be brought over. Maya stood frozen, unsure what to say. He pushed a glass toward her, his calm gaze making it impossible to refuse. She took it, her fingers brushing his for a second, that felt too long. The whiskey burned, but it steadied her. She managed to thank him, though he just gave a faint smile, like he already knew her story. Before she could ask his name, he slid a black card across the table. Only a phone number, nothing else. Maya tucked the card into her purse, her heartbeat still unsteady. She wanted to leave, but his eyes held her there. Something about his quiet confidence felt magnetic, dangerous, impossible to ignore. She excused herself, promising to return to her friend. He nodded once, almost approving. As she turned away, one of his men stepped aside to let her pass. Maya looked back once more. The stranger was watching her go, still calm, still unmoving, as if nothing that happened had surprised him. She had no idea she had just entered his world. Outside the club, the air felt heavy and damp. Maya pulled her jacket tight around herself, trying to process what had just happened. Her mind replayed every detail. The guards, the stare, the quiet authority. She didn't know his name, but she knew power when she saw it. Her phone buzzed, a message from Nina asking where she'd gone. Maya didn't answer. Instead, she walked faster toward the parking lot, the city lights blurring in her vision. Somewhere behind her, she felt the weight of unseen eyes following her every move. When Maya finally got home, the silence of her small apartment pressed against her ears. She locked every door twice, still trembling from the encounter. On the counter, she placed her purse and stared at the card inside it, just a number, printed in silver, no name attached. She told herself to throw it away. Instead, she slid it under her pillow like it was a shield. That night, she dreamt of dark eyes and steady hands holding her in a storm of noise. It was the first time in months she slept without fear. The morning came with the smell of burnt coffee and tired eyes. Maya put on her apron and headed to the small diner where she worked. The regulars greeted her, unaware that her world had tilted the night before. The clatter of dishes and soft music usually calmed her nerves, but today everything felt different. She kept glancing at the door, waiting for Ethan or maybe that stranger. Every passing minute without either felt both comforting and unsettling, like calm before something she couldn't name. Nina showed up mid-morning, her voice loud enough to turn heads. She slid into a booth and started talking before Maya could breathe. She wanted details about the man from the club, about what happened after she disappeared. Maya laughed it off, saying he'd just helped her out of a bad situation, but Nina didn't seem convinced. She leaned forward and whispered that she had heard stories about someone named Lorenzo who owned most of the clubs in the city. Maya's chest tightened as she realized that was likely who she'd met. Maya tried to brush it aside, but her hands trembled while pouring coffee. She didn't want to believe she'd crossed paths with a man like that. The idea of owing anything to someone so powerful made her stomach twist. But another part of her, the part still scared of Ethan, felt safer knowing such a man existed. Nina joked about rich men with dark secrets, but Maya wasn't laughing. When Nina finally left, Maya sat alone for a while, tracing the rim of her cup, wondering what her next mistake would cost her. As the afternoon crowd thinned, the doorbell rang again. Maya looked up and felt her heart drop. Ethan stood in the doorway, disheveled, eyes sharp with rage and obsession. He didn't belong here, not after the restraining order, not after last night. The room fell silent. Maya's hand tightened around the coffee pot as he took a step closer, pretending nothing was wrong. His voice carried a mocking calm that made her skin crawl. For a moment, all her progress, all her peace, vanished like it had never existed. Ethan's smile looked rehearsed, but his eyes told the truth. They were full of control and fury, the same mixture that used to make Maya feel smaller than she was. He started speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear, pretending this was a normal conversation. The customers stared. Maya wanted to shrink into the floor. Her boss Rosa came out from behind the counter, demanding Ethan leave. He ignored her. The air turned heavy until two regulars stood up, ready to step in. Ethan's confidence cracked for a moment before he turned and stormed out. The bell above the door jingled as Ethan left, but the unease didn't leave with him. Maya tried to keep working, but her hands were unsteady, and her thoughts refused to quiet down. Rosa told her to take a break, offering comfort she could barely process. In the restroom, Maya stared at her reflection, barely recognizing herself. She had promised that she would never let him control her again, yet here she was, still trembling from his presence. That night she couldn't eat or sleep. Only one thought stayed with her, the card under her pillow. When midnight came, Maya sat at her small kitchen table with the black card in front of her. The silver number glowed faintly in the dim light. She held her phone, debating what calling him would mean. Asking for help again felt like weakness, but doing nothing felt worse. She finally dialed, leaving a short, shaky message. She said she was scared, that Ethan had shown up again. The words came out soft but desperate. When she hung up, she immediately regretted it. She told herself he wouldn't respond. Someone like him had bigger problems. 3 hours later, headlights flooded her street. A dark SUV stopped outside her building. Maya froze by the window as the rear door opened. Lorenzo stepped out, not in a suit this time, but still commanding. His eyes scanned the area before he looked straight at her window. She almost didn't open the door, but the quiet knock that followed left no room for hesitation. When she did, he was there, his presence filling the narrow hallway. He said nothing at first, just looked around like he was checking for threats. She couldn't see. He told her to get her coat and shoes. His voice was low but absolute. Maya followed, unsure why she trusted him so easily. Outside, 2 men stood by the SUV, watching the street. She got in, her pulse racing as the city lights blurred past the window. They drove in silence until buildings gave way to empty streets and warehouses. Lorenzo parked near a quiet dock. The air smelled of salt and metal. He turned toward her, his expression unreadable. He said her ex had been asking questions about her, and about him. Maya's stomach twisted. She didn't understand how he knew that, but his certainty left no space for doubt. He said, Ethan had crossed into territory he shouldn't have, and that made him dangerous to both of them. She wanted to argue, but her voice wouldn't come out. The night around them felt too still. Lorenzo leaned back, his tone calm but edged with warning. He told her that once someone entered his world, there was no halfway. Protection had a price, and safety always came with rules. She didn't know yet what those rules were. When he dropped her off, he handed her a different card, this one embossed with a small silver crest. He told her to call only that number from now on. She didn't ask what it meant. The drive home felt unreal, like she was watching someone else's life unfold. Her apartment felt smaller than before, her old fears closing in again. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to decide if she'd made things worse by letting him in. Sleep finally came, but her dreams were full of shadows and unfamiliar eyes. The next morning, Maya woke to the sound of her phone buzzing. It was Nina asking if she was all right. Maya told her she was fine, trying to sound normal. Nina mentioned seeing a black car outside the diner earlier and asked if it was related to the man from the club. Maya brushed off the question, saying she didn't know. After hanging up, she peeked through her blinds. The same SUV was parked across the street. Her first thought was fear. Her second was relief. Someone was watching, but for once maybe on her side. At work, Maya couldn't focus. Every ring of the diner bell made her flinch. Rosa noticed but said nothing, only offering a warm smile whenever their eyes met. Around noon, Nina came by again, whispering that she had heard more about Lorenzo. Rumor was, he wasn't just powerful, he was untouchable. The kind of man no one crossed twice. Maya forced a laugh, saying people love to invent stories. But Nina's tone turned serious. She warned Maya that men like that never helped without a reason. The words stuck with her long after Nina left. Later that evening, Maya walked home under a sky heavy with clouds. The city lights flickered against puddles on the pavement. Halfway down her street, she noticed her apartment door wasn't fully closed. Her steps slowed. She whispered to herself that she must have forgotten to lock it, though she knew she hadn't. Inside, drawers were open, clothes scattered, papers thrown across the floor. Her photo frames were broken. Someone had been here. Panic rose as she called the police, but after filing the report she knew it wouldn't matter. It never did before. She picked up a broken picture of herself and Nina from their first vacation. The frame had been smashed intentionally, glass shards cutting into her palm. She wrapped her hand with a towel, shaking as she sat down. Everything about the break-in felt personal. Ethan's way of reminding her she was never out of reach. Her phone rang again. Unknown number. She ignored it, but it rang a second time. Finally she answered. It was Lorenzo. He said only 4 words, "Stay where you are." Before she could respond, the line went dead. Within minutes, the familiar SUV pulled up outside. Lorenzo stepped out first, followed by 2 men who entered the building without speaking. Maya opened her door just as they reached her floor. Lorenzo's eyes swept across the mess before landing on her bandaged hand. He told her this wasn't random. Someone was sending a warning. Maya said she already knew who. He didn't respond, just nodded to his men to take photos and gather what was left. Then he told her to pack a bag. She tried to refuse, but his look ended the argument. Maya stuffed clothes into a suitcase while Lorenzo waited by the door. He spoke quietly to someone on his phone, his tone firm but steady. Every few seconds she heard words like security, trails, and contain. When she finished packing, he took the bag himself and led her downstairs. She hesitated at the sight of the SUV again. He told her she couldn't stay there anymore. It was unsafe. She wanted to argue, but had no strength left. The only thing she could do was follow. When the doors locked behind her, the choice was made. They drove through parts of the city Maya had never seen before. The streets grew wider, cleaner, quieter. Expensive cars lined the roads and tall iron gates guarded every house. The SUV turned into one of them, the gates opening automatically as guards nodded them through. Maya realized this was his world. Power was built into every wall and every stair. When the car stopped, she saw a mansion larger than any building she had ever entered. The lights glowed warm, but the silence felt colder than the streets she had left behind. Inside, everything gleamed. Marble floors, chandeliers and walls filled with paintings of faces long gone. Lorenzo walked ahead, his steps sure and measured. A man appeared in the hallway, older, broader, his stare sharp. Lorenzo introduced him as Marco, his advisor. The man didn't smile. He studied Maya like a puzzle that didn't belong. Lorenzo told him she would be staying for a while. Marco said nothing, but his disapproval filled the room. Maya stood still, realizing she had traded one kind of danger for another, one she didn't yet understand. A kind woman named Maria led her upstairs, showing her to a room larger than her entire apartment. Maya ran her hand along the soft sheets, unsure whether to feel grateful or trapped. The window overlooked the garden, its perfect order unsettling. Downstairs she heard muffled voices. Lorenzo and Marco arguing. The walls couldn't hide their tension. Marco's voice carried distrust, saying this woman was a mistake. Lorenzo replied with something softer but firm, ending the discussion. When their voices faded, Maya sat by the window, wondering what mistake she had already become. Dinner was quiet, almost formal. The long table looked like it belonged in another century. Maria served them, her smile kind but practiced. Lorenzo asked if Maya was comfortable, his tone polite but distant. Marco sat opposite, saying little, his gaze sharp as a blade. Maya answered briefly, afraid of saying the wrong thing. She felt like a guest and a prisoner at once. When the meal ended, Lorenzo said she could rest easy. Marco muttered that trust had to be earned. She pretended not to hear, but the words stayed with her long after. That night, Maya lay awake staring at the ceiling's ornate patterns. Every creak in the hallway made her tense. The house was beautiful, but it didn't feel safe. She thought about Ethan, about Lorenzo's calm confidence, about the men who moved through the halls like shadows. Her world had split in two, the life she had before, and this strange new one that didn't seem to have a way out. She finally drifted to sleep, but even her dreams were full of locked doors and watching eyes. She woke to the faint sound of voices below. Curiosity overpowered fear. She crept to the top of the stairs, careful not to make a sound. From the study she recognized Marco's voice. He was saying that Ethan was connected to a rival family, and that Maya could be their spy. Lorenzo disagreed, saying she wasn't part of any scheme. Marco pushed back harder, insisting she was too convenient to be innocent. The words hit Maya like a blow. Even the man who had saved her wasn't sure she could be trusted. She backed away quietly, returning to her room before anyone noticed. Sitting on the bed, she tried to steady her breathing. She hadn't lied to anyone, yet she was now surrounded by people who thought she might be a threat. The thought of leaving crossed her mind, but the security outside made it impossible. She realized she was trapped again, just with better walls. For the rest of the night, she didn't move from her spot, watching the first light of dawn slide across the floor and wishing for an escape she didn't have. The next morning, Maria brought her breakfast on a tray, pretending not to see the exhaustion on Maya's face. Lorenzo appeared later, saying they'd tightened security around the property. His tone was kind, but carried command underneath. He asked if she felt safe. She wanted to lie, to say yes, but her silence answered for her. He studied her, then said that safety was something earned, not given. As he left, she couldn't tell if he was warning her or comforting her. Either way, she knew her life was no longer her own. Later that day, her phone rang. It was Nina again, sounding nervous. She asked where Maya was and begged her to meet somewhere public. Maya said she couldn't, that things had changed. Nina's voice dropped lower, almost frightened. She said she'd been asking around and learned more about Lorenzo, that people who crossed him vanished. Maya wanted to believe her friend was overreacting, but part of her couldn't ignore the possibility. When the call ended, she realized how small her world had become. One friend outside, one captor inside, and nowhere left to run. As evening fell, Maya walked through the garden to clear her thoughts. The sky turned orange behind the high stone walls. Security guards moved quietly near the gates, always watching. She realized how every part of this place was built for control. When Lorenzo joined her, she thanked him for helping her. He nodded, but said nothing, his presence both comforting and heavy. She tried to ask what would happen next, but he changed the subject, talking about trust again. That word was starting to sound like both a promise and a threat. When night returned, she found herself sitting by the window again, watching the courtyard lights flicker. The mansion seemed peaceful, but she couldn't shake the feeling that everything here was temporary. Her phone buzzed again, an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. No one spoke on the other end, only faint breathing. She hung up, her pulse quickening. When she looked down into the garden, she saw one of the guards holding a phone to his ear. Their eyes met briefly before he turned away. She realized she wasn't just being protected, she was being monitored. Sleep came late. She kept her suitcase near the bed, unsure if she would ever use it. The soft ticking of a clock filled the quiet room. Somewhere downstairs she heard footsteps and the closing of a door. She told herself it was nothing, but deep down she knew change was coming. Maya was no longer just a frightened woman hiding from her ex. She was part of something larger, darker, and far more dangerous. What she didn't know yet was that her old life hadn't completely let her go, not even close. The next morning began quietly. The house seemed too calm, too deliberate, like it was holding its breath. Maya sat by the window with untouched coffee, thinking about the unknown call from last night. When Lorenzo entered, his presence filled the room again. He told her they needed to talk privately. His voice carried no threat, but it gave her no choice either. She followed him down the marble hallway to his office, where the curtains were drawn, and the air smelled faintly of tobacco and rain. Whatever this conversation was, it felt important. Lorenzo closed the door and leaned against his desk, studying her for a moment before speaking. He said Ethan had been asking around again, too many questions, in places that weren't his business. Maya's stomach turned as she realized Ethan had no idea how deep into danger he was reaching. Lorenzo explained that his world ran on control, and Ethan had crossed a line by involving himself in it. Maya said she wanted no part of this, but Lorenzo only nodded, saying she already was. The look in his eyes told her escape was no longer possible. He told her that people who stirred trouble usually disappeared. The words were simple, but the message underneath was sharp. Maya asked what he meant, but he only said that everyone had choices and consequences. He mentioned his men were keeping watch near her old apartment, making sure Ethan didn't return. Maya's hands tightened around the edge of her chair. For months, she had wanted to feel protected. Now that protection came wrapped in fear. Lorenzo dismissed her with a quiet nod, telling her to stay inside until further notice. The tone left no room for argument. Hours passed with nothing to do but think. Maya wandered the large house, passing guards who pretended not to notice her. Each hallway looked identical, perfect and cold. She paused by a set of tall windows overlooking the courtyard. Men were training outside, moving with the precision of soldiers. She realized these weren't just employees, they were soldiers of a different kind. The house wasn't a home, it was a fortress. She began to understand that every smile from Lorenzo came from someone used to commanding, not comforting. And yet she couldn't ignore the strange pull he had on her. Later that day, Maria brought her lunch on a tray, insisting she eat. The woman's kindness offered a small break from the tension. Maria spoke gently, saying Lorenzo wasn't a bad man, only one who carried heavy responsibilities. Maria asked if Maria trusted him. The woman smiled faintly and said trust wasn't a matter of choice in this house, it was survival. Those words sank deep. When Maria left, Maya sat in silence, thinking about how safety here didn't come from locks or guards, but from belonging to the right side of danger. She wasn't sure which side she was on. As evening approached, Lorenzo appeared at her door again. He told her to come with him, saying they needed to drive somewhere. Maya hesitated but followed. The car ride was quiet, filled only with the hum of the engine and the faint sound of rain against the windows. They reached a secluded restaurant downtown, the kind of place that closed for private clients. Lorenzo led her to a small table in the back, already set for two. The staff moved quietly, never meeting his eyes. Everything about the moment felt planned, but she didn't know why. He asked about Ethan, how their relationship began and how it ended. The question came out calm, but his gaze never wavered. Maya hesitated, unsure what to say, then began to tell the story she never wanted to repeat. She spoke about how Ethan was charming in the beginning, generous and protective, how he slowly turned controlling, jealous and cruel. Lorenzo didn't interrupt. He listened closely, like every detail mattered. When she finished, she noticed his expression had changed. It wasn't pity, it was understanding, the kind that came from someone who had seen too much of the same thing. Lorenzo told her that men like Ethan never stopped. They didn't change, they only hid their sickness behind new masks. Maya nodded, though her chest tightened. She asked how he knew that with such certainty. He said he'd watched people like Ethan destroy lives, and sometimes entire families. There was a weight in his voice that hinted at his own past. For the first time she felt something close to sympathy for him. He poured her a glass of wine but didn't touch his own. The way he looked at her made her wonder if she was being tested. Halfway through the meal, Maya's phone started vibrating in her bag. The number was unknown again. Lorenzo motioned for her to answer, keeping his eyes on her. She hesitated, then put the phone to her ear. Ethan's voice came through, soft and mocking. He said he knew where she was, that he had seen her with her new protector. Maya's hand trembled as she looked up at Lorenzo. He mouthed for her to keep him talking. Ethan continued, saying she was making a mistake, that Lorenzo was dangerous and she had no idea who she was dealing with. Ethan's tone shifted, darker now, as he said he was outside. Maya's eyes widened, but Lorenzo remained calm, already signaling to his men near the entrance. She whispered that Ethan was nearby, but Lorenzo only nodded once, standing from his chair. He told her to stay seated, his expression unreadable. Maya's pulse hammered in her chest as he walked toward the front of the restaurant. Through the window, she saw a shadow moving near the parked cars, a flash of movement, a struggle, then silence. When Lorenzo returned, his knuckles were scraped, his eyes calm again. He told her they were leaving. Maya followed, her steps unsteady as they exited the restaurant. Outside, the air felt heavy with something unspoken. She wanted to ask what had happened, but one look at Lorenzo's face silenced her. He opened the car door for her and told her to rest. The drive back was quiet. The city lights flashed across his profile, revealing a man who looked both alive and untouchable. When they reached the mansion, he said little, only that she should stay close for the next few days. Whatever Ethan had done, it wasn't over. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every creak in the walls made her flinch. When she finally drifted off, the sound of footsteps in the hall woke her again. She opened her door a crack and saw two of Lorenzo's men walking briskly toward his office. Their faces were tense. Something was happening. She stayed in the dark, listening. A door closed, voices murmured, and then silence. She returned to bed, hugging her pillow, feeling more trapped than protected. This wasn't safety, it was being caught between two wars she didn't understand. The next morning, Lorenzo wasn't at breakfast. Maria said he was handling business, which meant something dangerous. Marco was there, his eyes on her the entire time. He asked if she had slept well, his tone polite, but empty. She replied that she was fine, though she knew he didn't believe it. He spoke about loyalty, saying it was easy to pretend until pressure arrived. His words felt pointed, though his smile never wavered. Maya excused herself as soon as she could, her heart pounding. She knew Marco wanted her gone, and that scared her more than Ethan did. Later that day she walked through the gardens, the sun bright against the tall stone walls. The quiet almost felt peaceful until she realized how few ways there were out of the property. Every gate was locked, every exit guarded. She wasn't a guest here, she was being kept. She sat on a bench near the fountain, staring at her reflection in the water. For months she had wanted to feel safe, but this wasn't safety. It was another kind of prison, wrapped in elegance and quiet control. The difference was, this time she didn't know who held the key. When Lorenzo returned later that evening, he looked different. Tired, but sharper, somehow. He told her Ethan was gone for now. His men had sent a message that would keep him away. Maya didn't ask what kind of message. She didn't want to know. He said she could relax now that the danger had passed. But deep down she knew danger didn't just disappear. It shifted. Lorenzo offered her a faint smile, saying she looked like she didn't believe him. She didn't answer. She simply nodded, pretending his words made her feel safe. After dinner she walked outside for air. The night sky was clear, the stars faint behind the city's haze. She thought about everything that had led her here, the fear, the chaos, the strange comfort she found in Lorenzo's presence. It made no sense, yet she couldn't deny it. She was drawn to him, even knowing what he was capable of. The house lights glowed behind her, casting long shadows across the garden. Somewhere in the distance, a phone rang. Inside that house, decisions were being made that would decide more than just her safety. The following morning, Maya woke to Maria knocking softly on her door. Lorenzo wanted to see her in his study. She dressed quickly, nerves tightening with each step down the hall. When she entered, Lorenzo was standing by the window, speaking on the phone. His voice was firm, controlled. He ended the call and turned to her, with that same quiet authority. He said Ethan had left the city, but someone else had started asking questions. A rival group was now involved. He told her this was bigger than she realized. Her ex had opened a dangerous door. He said that by calling him for help she had tied herself to his world. Whether she meant to or not, she asked what that meant. But he didn't explain. Instead, he told her that trust between them was now essential. She had to stay close, follow his lead, and never lie. The intensity of his words left no doubt this was more than a warning. It was a rule. She nodded, though her thoughts screamed. Every choice she made since that night at the club had carried her deeper into a life she never asked for. Lorenzo's tone softened for a moment. He said he didn't want her afraid of him. Fear made people unpredictable, and unpredictability was dangerous. Maya said nothing, unsure whether he was trying to comfort her or control her. He told her to rest, and that he'd handle what came next. As she turned to leave, he added that he was glad she called him that night. His words lingered long after she left the room. She couldn't tell if he meant it as reassurance or as a reminder that her safety now belonged entirely to him. The rest of the day passed in uneasy quiet. Maya tried reading, walking, doing anything to distract her thoughts, but nothing worked. The house had a way of amplifying her mind, every worry echoing through the walls. Maria brought tea in the evening, telling her that change always came with fear. Maya smiled faintly, pretending to understand. When she looked out the window again, she saw the black SUV parked at the gate, unmoving. It was the same one from her old street. She realized the line between being guarded and being watched had completely disappeared. That night, Lorenzo joined her in the garden. He said little, only that storms often looked calm before they broke. She asked what he meant, but he didn't answer. He only said she should trust him completely. His tone carried both promise and command. She wanted to ask if that trust went both ways, but stayed silent. As he walked back toward the house, she realized she had never truly known anyone's intentions, not Ethan's, not even her own. She stood alone under the garden lights, trying to convince herself that trust and danger could ever coexist. Rain began falling the next morning, steady and cold. The world outside the mansion looked washed out, blurred through the glass. Maya watched from her room as guards hurried across the courtyard. Something was happening again. Maria appeared with a message. Lorenzo needed to see her immediately. In his office, he told her Ethan was back in the city. Her chest tightened. He said it wouldn't last long. His tone made clear what he meant. Maya wanted to beg him not to do anything rash, but his eyes told her the decision had already been made. She asked why he cared so much about what Ethan did. He said Ethan wasn't just a man causing problems. He had started talking to the wrong people, the kind who used desperation to create chaos. Lorenzo said if Ethan kept going, it would draw attention to all of them. Maya realized then that this wasn't just about protection. It was about control, reputation, and power. She sat down, overwhelmed. Lorenzo approached her slowly, saying that once someone touched his world, they never left untouched. She didn't know whether he meant her or Ethan, maybe both. He reached for her hand briefly, his tone quieter. Now. He said he didn't want to frighten her, only to make her understand. Fear could be useful if it kept her alive. She met his gaze and saw something human behind the control, a trace of worry he tried to hide. She told him she didn't want anyone hurt because of her. He smiled faintly, saying it was already too late for that. When he left, she stayed sitting, replaying his words until they sounded like a confession. Whatever happened next, she knew there was no turning back. That evening, Maya walked to the balcony overlooking the courtyard. The rain had stopped, leaving the air cold and clean. Below, Lorenzo spoke with Marco, their gestures sharp and deliberate. She couldn't hear the words, but she knew the conversation was about her. Marco pointed toward her window once before walking away. Lorenzo looked up, their eyes meeting across the distance. Neither looked away. In that silent moment, Maya realized that her future was no longer her own. Whatever she had stepped into, it had claimed her completely, and there was no escape left to find. The next day arrived with a strange stillness. Maya sat at the breakfast table, the food untouched. Lorenzo entered, already dressed in his usual dark attire. He told her that business would keep him busy for the day, and Marco would handle things at home. The thought made her uneasy. Marco didn't hide his dislike for her, and she doubted he ever would. When Lorenzo left, the atmosphere changed completely. The house felt colder, the staff quieter, and every footstep echoed with suspicion. She wondered if this was how control looked when no one was watching. Marco appeared in the doorway, holding a stack of papers. He asked questions that felt more like interrogations: where she came from, who her friends were, what she wanted from Lorenzo. His voice stayed calm, but his eyes were sharp, searching for cracks. Maya tried to stay composed, giving short, honest answers. He smiled faintly, saying honesty was often the most convincing disguise. The remark left her shaken. When he finally left, she felt drained, like she'd just survived something more dangerous than she understood. In this house, truth seemed to matter less than loyalty. After he left, Maya went outside to escape the heavy silence. The garden stretched endlessly, filled with trimmed hedges and fountains that looked too perfect to touch. She sat by the water trying to gather her thoughts. She wanted to believe Lorenzo meant well, that this was still about protection. But the walls were too high and the gates too locked. This wasn't safety, it was control dressed as care. As she watched the reflection of the clouds in the fountain, she wondered whether she'd ever have a life again that was truly her own. Hours later, she heard the sound of engines near the gate. 2 black cars entered, followed by Lorenzo's SUV. He stepped out first, his expression unreadable, then motioned for his men to unload something. Maya couldn't see what it was, but the tension in everyone's movements was clear. Marco approached him, their voices low but firm. The discussion grew heated, gestures sharp. Maya stayed at the window, unable to look away. Whatever was happening, it wasn't business as usual. Lorenzo's calm finally broke when Marco mentioned her name. She saw the shift in his posture and turned away. That evening, Lorenzo didn't come to dinner. Maria said he was in a meeting and would eat later. Maya sat alone at the long table, the empty chairs making the room feel endless. Her appetite was gone, but she forced herself to eat, just to keep from thinking. When she finally stood to leave, Marco appeared again, saying Lorenzo was handling something messy. He said it like a warning and a test at once. She didn't ask questions. She went to her room, locked the door, and realized she didn't know whether she was being protected or contained. Sleep refused to come. Sometime after midnight, she heard the hum of a car outside. Curiosity pushed her to the window. Lorenzo's SUV had returned. He stepped out alone, his jacket streaked with something dark that the lights didn't hide. He walked inside without looking up. She backed away, her mind racing with possibilities she didn't want to face. Maybe Ethan was gone now, truly gone. The thought both comforted and terrified her. She lay awake for hours, telling herself she didn't want to know the truth, even though part of her already did. The next morning, Lorenzo appeared as if nothing had happened. His suit was clean, his voice steady. He greeted her politely, asking if she'd slept well. Maya wanted to ask about last night, but stopped herself. His calm was too deliberate. Over breakfast, he said Ethan would no longer be a problem. The sentence was short, final, and absolute. Maya stared at her plate, her hands cold against the silverware. She wanted to ask if Ethan was alive, but the answer was written in his silence. Lorenzo simply finished his coffee and stood to leave. When he left the room, Maya sat there for a long time, trying to process what his words really meant. There was no proof, but there didn't need to be. Ethan had vanished before, but this time felt permanent. The realization should have frightened her, but instead, it left her strangely calm. The danger she'd been running from was gone, but in its place stood something much larger, something with power she couldn't understand. She wasn't free, she was just under a different kind of rule, one that didn't need permission to decide her fate. Later that day, she found herself sitting in Lorenzo's study, surrounded by books and silence. He entered, carrying a folder in one hand and a faint smile on his face. He told her that everything was handled, that she could finally breathe again. She wanted to believe him, but her heart didn't. The words sounded too practiced. When he set the folder on the desk, she saw Ethan's name written on the corner. She didn't open it. She didn't have to. Lorenzo said she was safe now, but safety felt heavier than fear ever had. As the afternoon faded, Maria asked if she wanted to help prepare dinner. The simple offer felt grounding, so she agreed. The kitchen smelled of herbs and warmth, a rare comfort in the cold mansion. Maria talked softly while chopping vegetables, sharing stories from her childhood. Maya listened, grateful for normalcy even if it was borrowed. For a brief moment, she felt human again, not a problem to be solved. But when Lorenzo appeared in the doorway, the warmth vanished. His presence filled the room, and the silence that followed reminded her where she really was. He said Marco wanted a word with her in the study. Maya wiped her hands and followed, unsure what awaited her. Marco was waiting by the desk, a file open in front of him. He said they'd found something concerning Ethan had been meeting with a rival family before disappearing. Maya's pulse quickened. Marco implied she might have been part of it, knowingly or not. His tone wasn't accusing yet, but the weight of suspicion hung in the air. Lorenzo entered mid-conversation, his eyes sharp. Marco didn't stop talking. The tension between the two men thickened instantly. Lorenzo told Marco that Maya was under his protection, and not to be questioned again. Marco disagreed, saying protection shouldn't blind him to manipulation. Maya stood silently as the two men argued. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about control. When Marco finally left, Lorenzo looked exhausted but resolute. He told her that trust always had a cost, and that he had just paid it. She didn't know what to say. Gratitude felt wrong when protection came with blood and suspicion. She thanked him anyway, knowing words would never be enough, or safe. That night, rain returned, tapping softly against her window. She stood there for a long time, staring at her reflection. She thought of Lorenzo downstairs, calm and dangerous, and Marco waiting for him to make one mistake. She thought of Ethan, now just a memory with no ending. Everything around her was quiet, too quiet. She realized her life no longer belonged to her past, but her future wasn't hers either. She whispered to herself that she was free now, though even that lie didn't sound convincing anymore. Freedom here meant obedience. The following morning, she found Marco in the hallway. He nodded politely, as though nothing had happened the night before. He said Lorenzo wanted her to accompany him later to a meeting downtown. Maya hesitated, unsure what that meant, but Marco assured her it was for her safety. The word safety had started to lose meaning. When Lorenzo arrived, he confirmed it with a faint smile, saying she'd be fine. As they drove through the city, Maya noticed how every passing street reminded her of the life she'd lost, simple, unguarded, and painfully distant. They stopped at a high-end office building that didn't match the quiet menace of Lorenzo's world. He escorted her to a private floor where serious-looking men greeted him with respect that bordered on fear. Maya stayed behind him, saying nothing. The meeting lasted over an hour, filled with words she didn't understand, shipments, alliances, and debts. She realized then that Lorenzo's influence reached far beyond nightclubs and guards. When they finally left, his phone buzzed. His expression hardened as he read the message. Something had gone wrong, and she didn't need to ask what it was. In the car, Lorenzo stayed silent, his jaw tight. Maya asked if everything was okay, but he didn't respond. He only told the driver to head back. The city lights flashed across his face, turning his expression into something unreadable. Back at the mansion, he ordered everyone inside to stay alert. Maria pulled Maya aside, whispering that tension like this always meant violence was coming. Maya felt her stomach twist. She wanted to run, but the guards were already closing the gates. Whatever storm was building, she was inside it now, with no way out. That night, Maya overheard another argument between Lorenzo and Marco. Marco warned that the rival family, the Rosellas, had made a move. He said they had been watching Lorenzo for months, waiting for a weakness. Lorenzo said they wouldn't find one. Marco replied that they already had. Maya's name followed in the next sentence, and she froze. They suspected she was the link, the piece the Rosellas had used to learn about Lorenzo. She pressed her hand to her mouth, stepping back from the door. Every word made her realize her presence here might have started something she couldn't stop. Maya couldn't sleep after hearing that. She sat on the floor by her bed, knees pulled close, mind spinning. She didn't understand how things had spiraled so far. All she had done was ask for help. Now people were dying because of her, and families she'd never heard of were fighting in her name. When dawn arrived, she still hadn't moved. She told herself she'd find a way out, even if it meant running again. But deep down she knew there was no running from Lorenzo. Once you entered his world, you didn't leave it alive. The next day, Lorenzo told her they were taking a drive to clear her mind. She didn't believe that was the real reason, but she went anyway. They drove along the coast, the air colder near the water. He said little, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. When he finally spoke, he said trust wasn't a feeling, it was an agreement. He needed to know she hadn't spoken to anyone outside his circle. She assured him she hadn't, but he kept watching her, as if searching for lies. The silence that followed felt heavier than the waves below them. When they returned to the mansion, Marco was waiting with a phone in hand. He said there had been a call to Maya's number from an unknown line earlier that morning. Lorenzo looked at her, his expression unreadable. She swore she hadn't used her phone, but doubt flickered in his eyes. Marco handed over the device, showing a call log that confirmed it. Maya's stomach dropped. Someone was using her name, or her number. Lorenzo dismissed Marco but didn't look away from her. He said nothing, yet the silence between them felt like an accusation. That evening, Maya sat on the edge of her bed, trying to make sense of it. If she hadn't made the call, then who had? She opened her purse, checking her belongings, but everything looked untouched. Then she noticed her phone's case slightly loose. Inside, tucked behind it, was a small chip she didn't recognize. Her hands shook as she realized someone had been tracking her. She didn't know who planted it, but she knew what it meant. Someone inside the house had been spying, and in Lorenzo's world, that kind of betrayal never ended quietly. She debated whether to tell him. If she stayed silent, Marco would find it and accuse her anyway. If she told Lorenzo, he might not believe her. Both paths led to danger. In the end, she decided truth was the only chance she had left. She walked to his office, chip in hand. When he saw her, his expression didn't change. She placed it on the desk, explaining how she found it. He stared at it for a long time, then picked it up with a careful hand. His calm made her more nervous than anger ever could. He asked where exactly she had found it. She explained again, her voice steady though her pulse raced. Lorenzo nodded once, then called Marco into the room. The older man entered, and the air grew heavier. Lorenzo placed the chip on the desk, asking if it looked familiar. Marco examined it briefly, his face hardening. He said it wasn't theirs. That meant only one thing. Someone from the outside had gotten close. Lorenzo told him to check every room, every phone, every person in the house. The calm precision in his voice sent chills down Maya's spine. After Marco left, Lorenzo turned back to her. He said she did the right thing by bringing it to him. Maya nodded, unsure what that really meant. He told her the Rosellas were more dangerous than she could imagine, and they'd stop at nothing to break him. She asked what that had to do with her, but he didn't answer. He only said that people who wanted to hurt him often started with those he protected. The word protected landed strangely in her chest. She realized protection in this house wasn't safety, it was ownership. That night, as the guards doubled their patrols, Maya sat by the window again, watching headlights pass beyond the gate. Somewhere out there, someone was watching her life unravel piece by piece. The phone on her nightstand buzzed once, no name, no number, just a short message. It read, "We know who you really are." Her blood ran cold. She deleted it immediately but couldn't stop shaking. Whoever sent it knew exactly how to reach her. The walls around her were no longer keeping her safe. They were closing in. The next morning, Lorenzo's men searched every corner of the mansion. They moved quietly but with purpose, opening drawers, checking walls, and dismantling electronics. Maya sat in the living room, pretending to read while trying to stay calm. She knew the message on her phone was gone, but the fear it brought wasn't. Marco entered briefly, his expression darker than usual. He said someone inside had betrayed them, though he didn't say who. Lorenzo appeared moments later, silent and collected. His calm was the kind that came before something irreversible. The walls felt tighter than ever. By evening, Lorenzo called everyone into the great hall, guards, staff, even Maria. Maya stood near the back, her pulse racing. He said one of them had helped the Rosellas plant surveillance inside his home. No one moved or spoke. Then Marco handed him a small folder. Lorenzo flipped it open and announced a name, one of the guards who had worked there for years. The man tried to defend himself, but the denial didn't matter. Lorenzo's tone didn't rise, yet his command was final. 2 other guards dragged the man away, as the room stayed frozen in silence. Maya couldn't watch but couldn't look away either. She wanted to believe there would be justice, not punishment, but the sound of the door closing behind the guard said otherwise. When the room emptied, Lorenzo looked at her. He said softly that the chip wasn't her fault. It was part of a larger game. She wanted to feel relieved, but something in his tone said it wasn't over. He told her to rest, that things would calm down soon. The word soon echoed in her head all night, but calm never came. The next morning she woke to find her door unlocked and slightly open. The guards who used to stand outside were gone. A strange kind of quiet filled the air. She walked downstairs to find Lorenzo alone, sitting at the dining table. His eyes were tired, his posture rigid. He motioned for her to sit. He said the Rosellas had made another move, targeting one of his warehouses. She didn't understand how it connected to her, but he said she was still part of the reason it started. Guilt pressed hard against her chest as she listened. He said that when she ran from Ethan into his arms, everything changed. The Rosellas had used that night to plant someone close to him. Her arrival had given them an opening. She wanted to argue, but the truth was tangled too deep to escape. Lorenzo looked at her with something close to pity. He said none of this was her doing, yet she had become the spark of a war. His calm made it worse. She asked if people had died because of her. He didn't answer. The silence gave her the truth she feared. Later that day, Lorenzo disappeared again for hours. Maria told Maya he was meeting someone from out of town. The house felt different when he wasn't there. Lighter, but also more uncertain. Marco kept his distance but watched her from time to time. She stayed near her room, avoiding everyone. By evening, the rain started again. Maya stared at the streaks on the window, wondering how her life had turned into this. Every decision she made lately felt like survival, disguised as choice. She told herself once this was over, she'd walk away. Deep down, she didn't believe it. At midnight, the power flickered. The sudden darkness made her heart race. She grabbed her phone, using its dim light to navigate the hall. The mansion was too quiet, except for faint voices downstairs. She crept closer, recognizing Marco's tone. He was talking to someone over the phone, his voice urgent and low. Words like shipment and leverage reached her ears. Then her own name. She froze. He said Lorenzo was blinded by her, and that she'd cost them too much already. Before she could move, the light switched back on, and Marco was standing at the end of the hallway. Their eyes met. Neither spoke for several seconds. Marco finally said she shouldn't wander at night, his tone calm but cold. Maya mumbled an apology, returning to her room as quickly as she could. Her hands trembled as she locked the door behind her. She knew now that Marco wanted her gone, maybe even dead. He didn't need proof, just permission. She sat on the floor, back against the wall, and tried to steady her breathing. She wished Lorenzo would return, though she couldn't tell anymore if his presence brought safety or danger. The next day, Lorenzo returned, but his calm demeanor had cracks. He said little during breakfast, though his silence felt heavy with unspoken tension. Maya wanted to tell him what she'd overheard, but fear stopped her. If Marco was truly plotting something, Lorenzo needed to know, but if she was wrong, it could destroy what little trust she still had. By afternoon, the mansion grew busy again, men moving in and out, preparing for something big. Maria said Lorenzo was planning to end the feud once and for all. The phrase didn't sound like peace, it sounded like war. That evening, Maya found herself alone in the library, surrounded by the smell of old paper and rain. She pulled out one of Lorenzo's books, flipping through pages just to distract herself. Inside, a photograph fell out, a much younger Lorenzo with a woman beside him. The woman looked kind, her hand resting on his arm. On the back was a date from years ago. Maya's chest tightened. This was someone important to him, someone gone. She wondered what had happened to her, though deep down she already knew. No one in Lorenzo's world ever left without a cost. When Lorenzo entered the library, she hid the photo behind the book. He asked what she was doing, his tone gentle but curious. She said she was reading, and he nodded. He sat across from her, the quiet between them softer than usual. For a moment he didn't look like a man who commanded fear, just someone tired. He told her he wasn't always like this, that life forced him to become what people feared. She didn't know what to say. His honesty felt strange, almost dangerous. Vulnerability in his voice didn't make him safer, it made him real. He asked if she regretted coming to him that night. The question caught her off guard. She wanted to say yes, that she wished she'd run anywhere else, but looking at him, the words wouldn't come out. She said she didn't know. He smiled faintly, saying that was the most honest answer she could give. Then he said he couldn't promise her peace, only protection. The way he said it felt like both a warning and a vow. Before leaving, he told her to trust no one but him. The words sounded like safety. They also sounded like a trap. The next day, everything moved fast. Lorenzo gathered his men, preparing to meet someone connected to the Rosellas. Maya watched from the balcony as cars lined up outside the gates. He told her to stay inside, no matter what happened. She nodded, though the unease in her stomach grew stronger. Once the cars drove off, silence swallowed the mansion. Hours passed with no word. As night fell, thunder rolled in the distance. Maria lit candles, saying storms like this never brought good news. Maya sat by the window, watching lightning split the sky, praying he'd return. When the first gunshot echoed in the distance, Maya thought she imagined it. Then came another, closer this time. She ran to the balcony and saw headlights approaching fast. 2 cars swerved through the gates, followed by another that crashed into the fountain. Lorenzo's men were shouting orders, weapons drawn. Maria pulled her back from the window, telling her to hide. The sound of gunfire grew louder, echoing through the halls. Maya crawled under the bed, her heart pounding. She whispered his name without meaning to, realizing too late how much she feared losing him. The chaos outside went on for what felt like forever, then suddenly stopped. Silence took over again, broken only by rain hitting the windows. Maya crawled out slowly, trembling. The door burst open, and 2 of Lorenzo's men entered, covered in mud and blood. One said they had to move her, now. She followed them down the hall, past shattered glass and smoke. The air smelled of gunpowder. When they reached the stairs, Lorenzo appeared, limping slightly but alive. Relief flooded her so quickly, she almost cried. He told her to stay close. It wasn't over yet. They led her to the underground garage, where more guards waited, the sound of distant sirens mixed with thunder. Lorenzo ordered everyone to switch cars, saying the mansion wasn't safe anymore. Maya asked where they were going, but he didn't answer. He only said somewhere no one would find them. As they drove off, she looked back through the rain-streaked window. Flames were rising from the far side of the property. The mansion that once felt indestructible was now burning, swallowed by the darkness it had always carried inside. Hours later they reached an abandoned estate, deep outside the city. The place looked old but sturdy, its walls thick and cold. Lorenzo told his men to secure the perimeter while he helped Maya inside. She could see he was hurt, a deep gash on his arm, but he brushed it off. When they were finally alone, she asked what had happened. He said the Rosellas ambushed them. Marco was gone, missing or worse. The war had started. His voice was calm, but the exhaustion behind it made her realize how fragile even power could be. Maya cleaned his wound in silence, wrapping it with a towel she found in the kitchen. He winced once but said nothing. She asked why he was still helping her when she'd brought so much trouble. He looked at her for a long time before answering. He said she hadn't brought trouble, she had revealed it. The difference mattered. He told her that when she showed up that night, scared and desperate, he saw someone who reminded him of everything he used to be before this life hardened him. For the first time she believed him. They sat there quietly for a while, the storm raging outside. He asked if she ever thought about leaving it all behind. She said yes, but she didn't know where to go. He told her that running only worked if you had something to run toward. For a brief second their eyes met, and the distance between fear and connection disappeared. Then he looked away, standing slowly. He said he'd arrange for her to be moved somewhere safe once things settled. She didn't ask where. She just nodded, though she knew she might never see him again. That night Maya lay awake in the cold room of the old estate. Every sound outside felt like danger approaching. She thought of Lorenzo downstairs, probably planning the next move, and of Marco, whose fate she couldn't guess. She didn't know who the enemy really was anymore. All she knew was that this world had swallowed her completely. The rain against the window turned steady, rhythmic. For the first time in days, she felt tears slide down her face. She wasn't sure whether they came from grief, exhaustion, or the strange loyalty that now tied her heart to him. At dawn, Lorenzo woke her, saying they had to leave again. The Rosellas knew their location. Maya didn't ask how, she didn't want to know. They drove through back roads, mist curling over the asphalt. Lorenzo's men followed behind in another car. As the sun rose, he looked more worn than she'd ever seen him. She asked how much longer this would go on. He said until one side stopped breathing. The words chilled her. For a moment she wondered if she'd ever see peace again, or if she was fated to live forever on borrowed time. By midday they stopped near an abandoned church, surrounded by trees. Lorenzo said they'd stay there until nightfall. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old wood. Maya sat on a pew while he spoke quietly with his men. The church's stained glass threw fractured colors across the floor, making the place feel almost holy despite the danger outside. She watched Lorenzo's silhouette in the colored light, realizing he was both savior and destroyer in one man. Every step she'd taken since that night in the club had led her here, to this quiet ruin of faith. As dusk approached, Lorenzo received a call that changed everything. His voice hardened instantly. The Rosellas had captured one of his drivers, and with him information about Maya. They knew where she'd come from, her job, her friend Nina. Maya's heart froze. He said Nina might already be in danger. Without waiting, he ordered his men to move. Maya begged to go with him, but he refused. He said he'd handle it, and that she should stay hidden. She tried to argue, but his tone made it clear. This was no longer a request. He was protecting her his way. The hours that followed stretched endlessly. Maya paced the church, her thoughts running wild. She thought about Nina, the only person who'd been there before all this, and guilt clawed at her chest. She wanted to call, to warn her, but Lorenzo had taken her phone. All she could do was wait. Rain began falling again, leaking through cracks in the ceiling. When headlights finally appeared outside, she ran to the door. Lorenzo stepped out of the car, soaked but alive. His expression was unreadable, but one look told her the news wasn't good. He walked inside slowly, his coat dripping water onto the old stone floor. Maya asked about Nina, her voice shaking. Lorenzo hesitated, then said she was safe for now, but his tone betrayed him. She didn't push further. He told her the Rossellis wanted leverage, and Nina had been their attempt. They failed, but it was only a matter of time before they tried again. He said the only way to end this was to strike first. His words made her chest tighten. The man who had saved her was preparing to start a war in her name. Maya sat in silence after Lorenzo's words. The sound of rain outside filled the old church, each drop echoing through the hollow walls. She wanted to stop him, to tell him there had to be another way, but the determination in his eyes left no space for hope. He was no longer just protecting her, he was avenging her. She reached for his arm, and whispered that this war wouldn't end anything. He looked down at her, and said it already had begun. The calm in his voice was scarier than any threat she had ever known. Before dawn, Lorenzo's men prepared to move. The low rumble of engines outside, mixed with thunder. Maya followed him to the doorway, refusing to stay behind. He told her it wasn't her fight, but she shook her head. Everything that happened since the club had been her fight, whether she wanted it or not. For a moment, his eyes softened. He handed her a small pendant from around his neck, saying it had belonged to his mother. If anything went wrong, she was to leave and never look back. She didn't promise, she only held his hand tighter. As the cars drove off into the storm, Maya watched their taillights disappear down the muddy road. The church felt emptier without him, its silence pressing in on her. She sat by the altar, clutching the pendant. Every part of her wanted to run, but something stronger held her there, the sense that fate was still pulling her toward him. Outside, the rain eased, leaving behind fog that blanketed the world. She whispered a prayer for him, though she didn't know what she believed in anymore. Maybe not God, but the fragile chance of his return. Hours passed. She dozed off on the pew, jerking awake to the sound of approaching vehicles. Fear surged until she saw familiar headlights. Lorenzo's men returned first, their faces drawn and serious. When she didn't see him among them, panic clawed at her throat. She demanded answers, but no one spoke. Then another car appeared. Lorenzo stepped out, limping slightly, his shirt bloodied but his eyes steady. Relief flooded her body so hard she could barely breathe. He told her it was done. The Rosellis wouldn't bother them again. His calm voice carried both victory and grief. He walked past her toward the altar, dropping his gun onto the wooden pew. His hands trembled slightly, the first crack she had seen in his composure. Maya followed, asking who they lost. He didn't answer right away, then said Marco's name. Despite everything, her chest ached. Lorenzo sat down, staring at nothing. He said Marco had been right. Trust always had a cost. Maya knelt beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. He didn't push her away this time. They stayed there in silence, two people surrounded by ghosts of choices that couldn't be undone. When the storm finally cleared, Lorenzo said they would leave the country. He had a place where no one could find them, somewhere far from all this. Maya hesitated. She asked if running was victory or surrender. He looked at her and said survival was the only kind of victory people like them ever got. She wanted to believe him, but something inside still fought against the idea. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was the realization that no matter where they went, their pasts would follow. Yet she still agreed to go. By afternoon they were already on the road again. The city looked distant behind them, swallowed by fog and smoke. Lorenzo drove in silence while Maya watched the changing landscape outside. Every mile felt like a chapter closing, yet she couldn't shake the weight inside her chest. She asked what he would do now that it was over. He smiled faintly and said it was never truly over. People like him only ever found peace in motion. She leaned back, realizing she had stepped into a life where peace was something you earned, not something you had. They crossed into a quiet coastal town by nightfall, checking into a small inn by the sea. It was the first time Maya had heard the ocean in months. The steady rhythm of the waves felt almost kind. Lorenzo paid the innkeeper in cash and told her to rest. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind through the cracks. Despite everything, for the first time she wasn't afraid. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight they were alive, and for now, that was enough. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains, casting warmth across the room. Maya found Lorenzo outside, sitting by the shore. He looked different in daylight, less like a boss, more like a man who had finally stopped running. He asked if she'd slept. She nodded and sat beside him, both of them quiet for a long time. The sea stretched endlessly ahead, its calm deceptive. He said this place once belonged to his family, before everything changed. She listened, realizing that beneath all his power, there had always been loss. Maybe that's what made him human after all. As they walked along the beach, Lorenzo told her he was considering leaving everything behind, his business, his power, the city. Maya didn't believe him at first. Men like him didn't walk away, but his tone was different this time. He said maybe it was time for someone else to take over, that he was tired of burying people he cared about. She asked what that meant for them. He looked at her, and the silence between them said more than words ever could. He wasn't promising forever. He was offering truth, and that felt enough for now. They stayed there for a few days, pretending the world outside didn't exist. The locals didn't recognize Lorenzo, or if they did, they didn't dare mention it. For the first time, Maya felt the slow rhythm of normal life return, a shared breakfast, quiet walks, conversations that weren't about fear. Yet every night, she noticed him staring at the horizon, lost in thought. He was trying to let go, but the weight of who he was clung to him like a shadow, and deep down, she knew he would never fully escape it. One evening, while the sun dipped below the ocean, Lorenzo handed her a phone. He said she could call Nina. Maya froze. She hadn't expected that. Her hands shook as she dialed. When Nina answered, her voice broke into tears of relief. She said she was safe, that Lorenzo had kept his word. They spoke briefly, too much emotion to find the right words. When the call ended, Maya handed the phone back, her eyes wet. Lorenzo didn't speak. He didn't need to. The quiet gratitude in her eyes said everything he wanted to hear. Later that night, they sat outside, wrapped in the cool sea breeze. Maya asked if he regretted what he'd done. Lorenzo looked out over the dark waves, saying regret was a luxury men like him couldn't afford. But he admitted there were faces he'd never forget. She asked if she was one of them. He turned toward her, his expression softening. He said she was different, that she reminded him what it felt like to care again. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a confession he'd never spoken to anyone else. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The world around them seemed to pause. Then Lorenzo reached for her hand and she didn't pull away. They sat there, two people who had survived too much, finding something fragile between the wreckage. When she leaned her head against his shoulder, it wasn't romance, it was peace, the kind that only comes after chaos. For once there was no fear, no pretending, just silence, and the sound of the sea filling the spaces where words weren't enough. The next morning Maya woke to find Lorenzo already dressed, staring out the window. He said he needed to go back, just for a few days to settle unfinished business. She begged him not to, but his mind was set. He said he couldn't build a future while leaving pieces of the past unchecked. She asked if he'd return. He smiled faintly and said, "If I don't, you'll know I tried." The words broke something inside her. She didn't stop him. She just stood there memorizing the way he looked in the sunlight, uncertain if she'd see it again. After he left, time blurred. Days turned into weeks with no word. Maya stayed in the quiet town, living between hope and dread. Every knock on the door made her heart race. One evening she walked to the shore, the waves colder now. She clutched his pendant in her hand and whispered his name. The world felt too still, like it was waiting. Then, one morning, she found a letter slipped under her door. The handwriting was his. Inside were only a few lines, but they were enough to bring tears to her eyes. The letter said he was alive but couldn't return yet. He told her to keep living, to stay away from the world he could never leave behind. "If I disappear," he wrote, "it's only because I finally found peace in silence." There was no promise, no farewell, just quiet acceptance. Maya folded the letter carefully, pressing it against her chest. She didn't know whether to cry or smile. Maybe peace didn't mean having him back. Maybe it meant knowing she had mattered enough for him to write at all. Months passed. The town became home. Maya worked at a small cafe near the shore, her life simple again. Sometimes, customers would mention stories from the city about a gang war ending abruptly, about a man named Lorenzo who vanished. Each time her chest tightened, but she never asked questions. She just listened quietly and smiled when they said the city was finally calm. At night she'd walk the beach, tracing patterns in the sand, feeling the wind on her face, wondering if he was somewhere watching the same horizon. One evening she closed the cafe and walked home under a crimson sky. Near her door she saw a black car parked on the corner, its engine running. Her heart stopped for a second. When the window rolled down, a familiar voice said her name. Lorenzo stepped out, older, wearier, but alive. She froze, unable to speak. He smiled faintly, saying he promised he'd try. Her eyes filled with tears as he took her hand. For a moment time stood still, the past and present meeting quietly between them. She realized then that he had come back for good. They walked to the beach together, the same place they had once watched the waves in silence. Lorenzo said he had left everything behind, his businesses, his name, his power. He didn't want that life anymore. He wanted peace, whatever that meant now. Maya didn't ask how he managed it. Some questions were better left unanswered. She only nodded, feeling the warmth of his hand in hers. For once there was no fear between them, only the quiet certainty that both had finally reached the end of their running. In the weeks that followed, they built a quiet rhythm. Mornings by the sea, evenings by candlelight. Laughter where there had once been whispers of danger. Sometimes he would wake from bad dreams, breathing heavy, and she'd place her hand on his chest until he calmed. Other nights they'd stay up talking about the lives they almost had. The world outside kept turning, but for them time had slowed. Every sunrise felt like something they'd earned, something fragile and real. Maya knew peace wouldn't last forever, but she also knew it finally belonged to them. One morning, a fisherman from the docks brought news that the city's underworld had changed hands again. New names, new power, same shadows. Lorenzo listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When the man left, Maya asked if he missed it. He said no, but his eyes said otherwise. He told her that power was like a chain. It only felt good until you tried to take it off. She placed her hand over his and said he didn't need it anymore. He smiled softly, saying she was the first person to ever convince him of that. That night, as they walked along the beach, the moon hung low over the water. Lorenzo said he sometimes wondered what would have happened if she hadn't run into him that night at the club. She laughed quietly and said she probably wouldn't be alive. He shook his head, saying, maybe he wouldn't either. The wind carried their words into the dark, soft and fleeting. In that moment, Maya realized how far they had come, from strangers in danger to two people who finally understood what it meant to survive together. Weeks later, Maya found him sitting by the shore, watching the sunrise. He looked peaceful in a way she had never seen before. She sat beside him, and he turned to her with a quiet smile. He said he never believed in second chances until her. She didn't reply, just rested her head on his shoulder. The waves kept rolling in, steady and endless. For the first time she felt the world wasn't closing in anymore. It was opening, softly, slowly, as if forgiving them both for everything they had done to reach this peace. Years later, people in the town still talked about the quiet couple who lived by the sea. No one knew their story, and they never told it. Maya sometimes stood by the window, watching the horizon, the same pendant still around her neck. Lorenzo would walk in, bringing her coffee, his face softer with time. They had built a life out of chaos, and found calm in the one place no one thought to look. The night she hugged a stranger to escape her past had become the moment that saved her life forever.